So that's what I've
Yeah.
been thinking about.
Yeah. I think that Cherie uh I think like framed that really well in the last conversation when she pointed out that Octavia's first series is called Pattern Master. So just being able to like read those patterns and follow them. Yeah. But okay, so we ended off our last conversation on chapter 6. This is a little bit of a reminder. That was the chapter where the folks that was the chapter with the garden thieves, where folks broke into the neighborhood and stole stuff, and they had to set up the night watch. There was that piece where Lauren's friend basically exposed her a little bit for having some radical and scary ideas. And that chapter kind of ended on this idea about we don't know if good times are going to come back, but it won't matter if they do if we can't survive the bad times now. So we ended on that note of just sort of like resilience and perseverance, um, almost like just in case. So we start chapter 7. Is I think pretty special because chapter 7 is the first chapter where Lauren's new religious belief system gets named. This is where we first get introduced to Earthseed as a concept. And she explains this idea of like the destiny of Earthseed and Earthseed communities is to take root among the stars. This dream of, you know, uh, escaping the Earth and uh, creating life throughout the universe. So um, we also learn a little bit more about Lauren and sort of like what her plans are and how she plans to adapt in this world. She puts together her go bag. Her dad doesn't let her put a gun in it. We learn a little bit more about her plan to, flee north if she ever needs to Oregon, and about these sort of like, border disputes that are kind of hinted at. This idea that like, oh, if you cross this border, you might get shot, and if you cross this border, you might definitely get shot. So just a little bit more of a glimpse of the deterioration of this society, and the splits between like different social groups that were maybe once a little bit more connected and supportive of each other. There's a quote that I wanted to point out that Lauren says she added to her book. A tree cannot grow in its parent's shadow, and that being a refrain that's kind of like it's about Earthseed and the earth, but it's also a little bit reminiscent about this growing rift between her and her dad, and the way that he, is moving through all this and the way that she is. And then, this idea that she feels too young. She feels like she wants to do all this stuff. She wants to go all these places, and everyone is telling her that, it's just it's not time. That she's not ready yet. So yeah, I did want to give Tara a chance to check in since she just joined us, but maybe after that, if anybody has any reflections or anything that they want to point out from that chapter, yeah, please feel free to share. What's up, Tara?
What up?
Number, color, and it is number, color, and have you read chapters 7 through 12? And how do you feel about spoilers?
Okay. I'm feeling like a periwinkle 8. I have read chapters 7 through 12. I just finished reading the whole thing, and I'm not a fan of spoilers, but since I read the whole book, I don't really care and stuff. So, yeah, in this instance.
Wonderful. Appreciate it. But yeah,
Yeah.
anything that anybody would like to share, observations or thoughts from chapter 7. And let me flip through the.
And
Oh yes, please.
and this probably goes a little bit back to even maybe chapter 6 a little bit. Someone had mentioned in the last meeting uh, with the way her dad responds to her concerns about like, yeah, you're right, but we can't do it that way. People won't move if you present it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And someone had mentioned that it felt manipulative. And
Interesting.
I thought that too when I was reading the chapter. Like,
Yeah.
I think the dad is really condescending to people in that regard. He's like, they can't handle it. And I think sometimes I wonder about like, I don't know, is when you think you know the answers and nobody else does, sometimes that's why we get in these problems.
Yeah.
And you think people can't handle it, so I got to do this stuff for all these people who don't know any better. It's like not trusting people to make their own decisions. And I don't know if that's, I thought about that a lot, I guess,
Yeah.
meeting.
No, for
It goes a
sure.
little bit into the, I don't know, there's that play a little bit as the book keeps going, maybe. I
Yeah.
don't know.
No, definitely, definitely. And I think that that's I remember us talking about that a little bit just because it's like it's this juxtaposition between like you know, like when are you when are your somebody safe, really preventing them from growth, you know? But yeah, did anybody else have any thoughts on that idea or that concept? This idea of
I
like,
did.
yo, yes, yes, please, Cass, please share.
Yeah, I same. Like when I heard that, and and him his explanation, very much so. Me being a parent, is very telling. I remember feeling, being a child and thinking that like, I felt like I was being held back from certain things. But now that I'm an adult, it's like, and I have a child, it's like you want to do what's best for. I feel like her dad, as well as me, is like you want to do what's best for your child. You don't want them to hurt. You don't want them to know the struggle. You don't want, and really, he doesn't want to know the real world. Same with me. Like I don't want, sometimes I don't want him to really know what's out there, but I know within that thinking, um, it holds him back, not having him experience the world and know what the world actually is. And I really do think it's a manipulation, but I don't think he does it in like a callous way. It's just, I feel like it might be just, I just want to protect you, and I feel like I can protect you from everything, which is another thing that parents think, and it's false. Like
Hmm.
you can't protect your kids from everything.
I,
Even though you want to,
I
you
like to
can't.
add here is one of the old people on the call, a father, grandfather, and I think the tension, the generational tension, is not abnormal. It
Mhm.
always happens in families and communities. It can be in healthy tension, if you create space that allows that tension to unfold in a healthy kind of way. Through that, for example, I would say that yes, one of the primary roles of parents is to protect, to train and serve, and often that can lead to um, children reacting like, "Damn, they go again trying to tell me what to do. I got this dumbass parent. How did I get these dumbass parents?" So, uh, and of course, parenting, unfortunately, is not a trained skill. Most of us learn to parent through modeling the parenting styles we were raised in. And ironically, often even as children, we say, "Oh, I ain't gonna do like my mom and dad did," and then we look up and we're doing the same damn thing the same way. So with that said, I say the other thing, the beauty of that tension is that youth can bring their own perspective to the world and bring ideas that older people may have, because of their experience, that shit ain't gonna work, can't do that. But if you have communities that are healthy enough to embrace,
Can y'all still hear us?
when we are at our best, or nurturing, supporting, and sharing our knowledge and wisdom, to but without killing and destroying and preventing a new generation, new voices to bring their perspectives and bringing those perspectives included in the fact that today's world, while it still is cloaked in a lot of yesterday's shit, there are opportunities and possibilities that young people can bring because this moment, while there are a lot of similarities, there are differences, and in those differences can become opportunities. So I would just say for the young people on the call, be patient with us, please.
Alvin, I'm sorry, Alvin, you just stepped away, but I saw you grab the mic for a second. Did you have something that you wanted to add on that point? Yeah, we'll wait till he gets back. I'm talking to him as if he's right here. He's back.
Can I add something?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Go for it, Tara.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I want to, I'm loving this conversation so far. All these different perspectives, and I'm just like, wow, that's not how I interpreted it when I first read it, but I can see that, like hearing it. And I think one other interpretation that I would add when I was reading it was like, in a sense, like strategy and stuff, like kind of in the way like the dad was like, hey, like, listen, like, you know, I know that you want to do things this way and stuff, but like based off of my experience, so like in a sense, like there is a sense of protection and stuff, but like maybe like a sense of like coaching as well and stuff. And it'd be like, here's like another way that you could go about it and stuff. Yeah, that was all I wanted to add.
Yeah. I want to hear Zalalem. I know you just joined us. I want to hear you check in, number, color, and have you read chapter 7 through 12 of the book? And how do you feel about spoilers? If not, then I want to hear from Alvin, and then I want to jump back in.
Hello, howdy y'all. I am a light green 7.9 and I have read them. It was just last year, so any spoilers are good reminders. I'm open to them.
Wonderful.
Yeah, along those same lines, I was just curious what y'all saw as the similarities between Lauren and her father in terms of their leadership style, and what factors do you see, like, I think that was spoken to, where she is on her journey as like a younger person versus where the father's at.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll actually hop back in and speak to that a little bit because as Tara said, we're off to a great start, y'all. Let's keep it up. But I think it's, I think this concept of manipulation is kind of interesting because on some level, I wonder if maybe all people work is a little manipulative inherently, especially when you are, a leader in a fragile community, with like stressed bonds, and especially in times of crisis, because it's like, yeah, he's playing the people game a little bit, he's playing to people's, their sensibilities and their expectations and the things that he knows they'll agree with and understand, but it's also not like he's doing that to, fleece resources from them or to, can, control them to maintain his power and role and status in the community. He's doing it that way because he knows, hey, if I just tell y'all like it is, everybody's going to stop listening. We're going to get into a whole mess and we're not going to be able to get anything done, and maybe he's wrong about that. Maybe that is not, and clearly that approach does not save this community, like for those who have read it, the ones who know, but it's like for a time being, it works, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but at one point, Lauren even says, like, in like remembrance of him, he took a bunch of houses and made them a community, you know? So it's like, is his style perfect? Maybe not. And sort of related to that, I think that kind of like one of the themes throughout the story is this idea that there really are no good decisions or bad decisions, just decisions and their impacts, you know, and especially in these like parent relationships or these leadership relationships, we see that really like taken to taken to extremes. And I think one example that this chapter kind of foreshadows is this relationship between Lauren's dad and her younger brother Keith, you know, because you know, this relationship is really interesting. One, because there's just a lot of drama sort of like twisted up in it, like interpersonal drama, which we'll get into. But it's also because like Keith makes things difficult. And even though their dad really tries to do the right thing, he doesn't always, you know, and we'll talk a little bit about where that goes. But yeah,
Yeah,
please.
no, I just want to say I think it's a really good point you made about the father doing it not necessarily for personal gain,
Yeah.
but for keeping the community together
Yeah.
and like trying to have more altruistic goals for that reason, for like kind of being deceptive a little bit. I was just trying to make the point. I think it's a slippery slope
For
to
sure.
assume that you know better than other adults in the community,
For
and you
sure.
gotta hide things from them because
Yeah.
you think you're the one that has all the answers.
Yeah.
And I just think that could lead to a lot of problems down the road also.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
hey, I want to add real quick to that as an OG again. All bad choices don't lead to the same level of consequences. A misdemeanor is not a felony. So,
That's true.
so and even the idea of not sharing everything because you think you know more, you know, I ain't gonna tell my children everything. They ain't ready. I'm sorry. I'm not doing it. Fat meat is, some people don't think fat meat's greasy. And unless I have a sense with young people and old people that what I share is safe, you ain't got to worry. I'm gonna lie to you first. Back
Yeah.
at you.
What's up, J. Rue? You want to check in for us? Number and color, and have you read the most recent chapters of the book that we're talking about, 7 through 12?
Hey everybody, Jerry here, Red and Black 10, and I've read the entire book, though it was some time ago, like maybe a month or two ago, so some of the details are fuzzy on when certain things happen. So as the conversation goes, I'll listen and be like, okay, we're at that part, cool. Here's my 2 cents.
Appreciate it. Yeah. But yes, let's we can definitely come back to these pieces as the conversation goes. If you hear anything that brings this conversation about, you know, disclosure and transparency and leadership back to mind, bring it up. But I did want to slide on into chapter 8 real quick. Chapter 8 really starts off with some of Lauren's neighbors get pregnant. Well, one of them gets pregnant and the other is the father. Um, uh, but yeah, and it's you know, there's this now that I'm thinking about it, throughout the book, Octavia really tests your moral sensibilities. And a lot of the way she does that is through like intimate relationships, which I think is really interesting, you know, because this couple, they are 17 and 23, not really acceptable, you know, by a lot of people's standards today. You know, there's a later relationship with a much larger age gap, you know, and, you know, throughout the book, multiple characters at multiple points are kind of like, you know, well, that's not good, you know, but at the same time, there's this sort of undercurrent of like, well, what is good right now? You know, like, is this really our main concern right now? And even with this situation, it's like, you know, it's yeah, you know, there's this questionable dynamic here maybe, but the baby's coming, you know, and the sense that I get, I don't know if they ever really touch on this, but the idea of you know, an abortive is not really it's not brought up as an option here, you know, and that might just be because it's not available, you know, it could be a legal thing, you know, there's all sorts of stuff going on that side of it. But you know, and this really, um, this brings up a sentiment in Lauren that I think we'll be really excited to revisit later down the line, because she's like, why would anybody choose to bring a baby into the world in with the world is like this? And she's like, if that was me, I might just kill myself, you know? And so yeah, so there's this theme of just like, you know, and honestly, it's like it's interesting because, you know, she's like 16 at the time, but in her thinking about it, she like gives herself the answer a little bit, I think, but just like maybe isn't like old enough to see it, which is just that like it's not about what people choose to do. It's about the fact that it's going to keep happening, you know, regardless of whether you think it's a good idea or not, you know. So how do you adapt? So we'll get into that later. And then we also learn about her first love, Curtis Talcott, and just you know, that is going to be yeah, that'll come back up because it's a very close and dear relationship to her. So then we also learn a little bit more about her little brother Keith. I believe in the last chapter was the first time that like Keith's sort of troubled nature sort of gets mentioned. You know, she's talking about like, yeah, my younger brother's gonna learn how to use guns eventually, and Keith is a question mark just because he's a little, you know. But in this chapter, we really start to get into it because we learn that Keith, who is 13 at the time, I believe, 12 or 13, really wants a gun, really wants to be taken out with the rest of the older kids to learn how to shoot guns, and his dad won't let him because he's too young. And so while they're out shooting, Keith sneaks out of the neighborhood, sneaks out beyond the wall, gets beat up and robbed, you know, and comes back home having lost his key to their neighborhood. They took his clothes, his shoes, everything. And uh, the only uh, consequence he's given for that by his parents is that he has to get up in front of the whole community at church and basically confess this thing he did, harrowing for a child, obviously, you know, humiliating for sure. But this is really the start of a, you know, I see this as the start of, or maybe at least like the first expression of this rift in the family that we'll see like stressed and like grow as the situation around them gets more dire. But I think that the main things to really like remember here in regard to this relationship is that um, uh, Keith is oh, what is her name? What is her name? Corey, yes. Keith is Corey's favorite. Her favorite child, I believe, because he's her child. Or like the youngest or something like he's her favorite. It doesn't quite matter why. Uh uh Keith is the favorite. Um Oh, there was one more piece about the family dynamic that I was going to mention, but I forgot it. It'll come back to me. But yeah, Keith is the favorite, and of Corey. Um, and there's just there, and he feels like he has something to prove, you know, to the community, to himself, to his dad, which is why he wants to, you know. There's this thing about like, oh, well, you let Lauren go out, and she's a girl, you know. So, yeah, and we'll see that come back up later as well. But yeah. Chapter 8, you know, new babies in a world of death. Keith, he wants a gun, you know. How do any thoughts or reflections from this piece? Maybe even like looking more on this you know, we were talking a little bit about like family and parenting like for the previous chapter. So, you know, does anybody have any thoughts like on this relationship along those lines? I see you, Miss
I had,
Betty.
yeah, I had a thought about the married couple where she said, well, now they have to live in half a garage with this other couple. That
Yeah.
struck me because I kind of think that's what's happening now. A lot of people
Mm.
that should be getting their own homes and are ending up living at home or living in the basements because
Mm-hmm.
they're having trouble getting, their own homes or affording apartments. So that kind of
Yeah.
struck me as her saying, why would they get married? Now they're neither one of them have jobs, and now they're going to live in half this garage with another couple. So
Yeah.
that kind of struck me.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely this you know, this question of like it's almost like a more fundamental question of like how do you Because obviously, if you don't have babies, the community can't grow and survive, but it's also like you're going to bring a baby into all this scarcity. So it's like, it's just like a fundamental question of like, how do we get through this? Like, how do we persist through this? And the answer is you just do. You just do.
Man, for me, I think I really wound up reflecting on I think the continued conversation of age. 'Cause I
Mm,
think in this chapter it's very apparent to me that even young people can bring life, but there's still an urge for young people to like wield like weapons of war or death, and what comes with the
mm,
responsibility of bearing both. And it's really emphasizing to me that age is just a number. Like when I look outside of Western confines and ideals, that like very young people, like even my grandmother was married before she was 18, and had my siblings. So like she was bearing a responsibility to like maintain and survive and like choose her own livelihood
yeah,
through her environment from like a very early age. And that wasn't even like 50 years ago. So well, it
yeah,
was over 50 years ago. It was like 60 years or 70 years ago. But like I don't think it's far off for us to have to reflect on ages like a limiting factor or something, but like we need to embrace very quickly how young people can either step into agency or be shown like what responsibility in any aspect can look like, and choose how to do it with community and with themselves, even if they don't understand all of the risks. But
yeah.
I think it's really hard to imagine that little boy was like, I want to be responsible for something, but no one gave him a chance to figure
Mm,
out how to do it ethically or in a way that community accepted. And he just fucked around and found out. So it
yeah.
really sucked to hear his story go that way.
Yeah, and I think it kind of takes us back to remind me your name, Bill. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. It reminds me of what Bill spoke to just about how, that slippery slope that comes from like, sometimes you think you know what's best, and then there's this question of like, well, if they had tried it a different way, would it have gone a different way? Maybe, maybe not. We'll never know. But it's like, sometimes you might think that giving Keith this BB gun is the best thing for him right now, or you might think that making him go up in front of the church will teach him a lesson, and you end up wrong, and I think definitely, at least in the Kepler community, we try to maintain an atmosphere where it's like we recognize when people want to contribute and we find a way for them to contribute, but it's like how far can you really take that, especially in times of crisis, big question. Good question. Yeah, yeah. I think something else that you spoke to that it made me. Oh, I see, Cass. I see you came off mute.
Excuse me. Um, yeah, just with the with the younger brother and how he was the favorite. I feel like they both parents seen something in him, and they just decided to deal with it in different ways. The mother decided to overly um maybe compensate for the dad in a way, because you know I feel like the dad had like a fear or an inkling that he might I don't want to call him, I don't want to say trouble, but like he might be a little feisty, or he might be the one to try it, you know, and he might be the one that I'm gonna have to bring the heel, but in turn, the mother doesn't, treats him a different way because I don't know, like maybe she feels he needs more love. Maybe he just needs a little bit more love than the others because of of that of that thing. And like let me see, what is her name? Yeah, Tara was saying, he was very, gun ho about getting out of that wall. And what did he do? He found a way. So
He got
he's
out.
so
Yeah.
yeah, he got out. He wants to experiment with these different things, and instead of, you know, him being able to do these things within community, he did it outside the community. And I feel like that is the struggle with being a parent, is knowing when your child is ready and when they're not. And sometimes even if they, you don't think that they're ready, introducing it and yourself might be safer than them actually trying to do it by themselves, because they're going to do it. That's one thing I learned about kids. Kids always find a way. If they really want to do something, and this is the true with people just in general. If you want to do something, you're going to figure out how to do it. You know, you're going to figure out a way to feed on the or to do these things that you're curious about. And you just have to decide if it's going to be. I feel like us as elders, we have to figure out, are we going to just let them, fuck around and find out, or are we going to bring them in? you know?
Well, I think one of the challenges, well, when done well, when a community works as a community, the members, young people in the community have other voices with lived experience they can talk to. It's
Yeah.
that's not always their parents. So children always have a rather challenging relationship with their original gods until they discover, damn, my mom and daddy ain't God after all. How'd I get these dumbass parents? So by being in community with others, uncles, aunts, grandmothers, etc., it expands the depth and breadth of their opportunities for learned experience that are not all the same, and it's not always filtered through the parent-child relationship. Now, the last piece I'll add from what Betty said about the challenges of housing. No, ironically, there was a time, and in some communities, still the case, where you got 2, 3 generations living in the same space. And while that may seem materially problematic, and often is, there's a richness that comes out of that that you don't get when you got single households and you send the parents and grandparents off to the nursing home.
Yeah. I wanna speak to two pieces. The first coming with that piece that M brought up about like when a community functions like a community, because I think that we were talking about this a little bit off camera before the show started, but there's this sort of tension between like, all right, we maybe have these questionable dynamics and these questionable people in this community, but at the same time, like that's all we got, so maybe we can't spend as much time like trying to find the perfect people to be in relationship with because like, we just got the people that we got with us. But at the same time, it's like that community is sustainable and strong enough to a point, but then it gets to a point where like, like we see with Keith, where their ability to care for each other and provide for each other is overwhelmed just like by the by the environment. So I think that that's a very real piece. It's like, like is this community equipped to all of the challenges that come with being a community? Maybe not. And then the other thing that M spoke to that I wanted to touch on that Z also hinted at is this, and this is really just like throughout the book. It's this, all of this stuff is unfamiliar to us here because it's just been constructed that way, like multifamily households, under quote unquote underage or immature, like pregnancy and marriage, like having to live a nomadic lifestyle in close proximity to death and violence is not abnormal in a lot of places in the world. And it really is. And the only difference is that political history, Um, there's this her name is Ismatu Gwendolyn. She's a really skilled writer and speaker. She currently lives in Sierra Leone, helping her tribe farm rice while she, writes and speaks and does that. But she speaks about how before Sierra Leone became what it is now, which, is, a place with a lot of economic and social hardship, it was one of the premier places to come and like build a life and get educated and find work. But through those political processes, it collapsed into a place where now a lot of people would consider like a third world country, but it's like any place can become like that. So I do see that Mama Pambana joined us. So I would love to have you check in, Mama Pambana, number, color, and then have you read chapters 7 through 12? And how do you feel
Mhm.
about spoilers?
How do I feel about what?
Spoilers.
Spoilers? That's the question I had last time. So,
Yeah.
Sunlight, White, Infinity, and yes, I read chapters 7 through 12. And I mean, you can't spoil it for me because I've already read Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. So,
Well, there we go. Thank you for joining us. Alvin, I saw that you had something, and then we'll move on to chapter. We'll bring in chapter 9.
Yeah, so I think one of the pieces that it made me think of was, in some ways, the community is forced to come closer together,
True.
in more of an extended community than we have now, because out of necessity. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that people have the skill set that we used to have when we lived more in that.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways, like it feels like that ability to work together has atrophied,
Yeah.
but people are still forced. So people are trying, but it's on a social fabric where everyone has been so isolated.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's a lot of those things that we see as like archaic, like they don't fit in this society, but fit in like living many families in a household, for example, definitely something that like um a behavior developed under like a specific environmental condition like throughout history, and yeah, we've like really forgotten, or a lot of us have really forgotten how to do a lot of that. But when we start to get to that point, you gotta relearn, yeah. But let's move on into chapter 9. So this one starts with another verse from uh the books of the living. And it's this verse about how all struggles are essentially power struggles. Who will lead, who will rule, who will lead, who will define, refine, confine, design, who will dominate. All struggles are essentially power struggles, and most are no more intellectual than two rams knocking their heads together. I just think that that is I want to talk about that more in a second, but I think that is sets the tone for this chapter and a lot of the rest of the story. But um, Keith gets his first gun, a BB gun, and immediately starts demonstrating sociopathic behavior. I don't know. I think it's like a fun little touch that she's like, he gets his BB gun and he starts practicing on squirrels and birds. It's like, oh, okay. We see early on kind of who this young man is, I think, in a lot of ways. Just somebody who practices exerting his control over quote unquote lesser life forms, or that's how I read it. So he goes out again. Everyone's upset. Lauren has to teach for Corey because Corey's too upset to work. Um, while Keith's out again and they're looking for him, Corey lets it slip that basically, like, she blames Lauren's dad for Keith going missing again. And then she's like, "You're not looking hard enough. If it was your precious Lauren, you'd be out there looking." And Lauren's like, "What did I do?" you know? So just like more of these rifts, showing up and these relationships starting to break down. And, going back to that point of like, if a community was community, they'd have some way of like managing those relationships and repairing those rifts. But you don't, like Alvin said, some of those skills start to atrophy. um Keith comes back and his dad beats him like he stole something because he did. Yeah, basically Keith comes back with money, with new clothes and stuff. And the implication is obviously that he's leveraged his BB gun, as to do some robbery, as you do on the outside. And their dad is not having it. And that is really and Lauren talks about this later on, but that is a point of no return. He beats this boy so bad that a lot of relationships just never come back from it. And after that, Keith leaves again. He takes the family gun with him. their dad doesn't go to look for him, which like really drives that wedge between him and Corey even deeper. Keith hates the dad. Lauren hates Keith for what it's done. This trouble has done to the family, and so, there's just more and more of that tension. And then, Keith starts bringing back more and more gifts to the family, cash for Corey, other stuff for the other boys, nothing for Lauren or their dad. But clearly, he thinks he's got it living on the outside. So, yeah, I'll open it up for anything on chapter 9.
Hey, the only piece I will add right now, Chin, is we do live in community. It's just that the community we live in now is not, it has a different set of values and social constructs that support the particular values of this social order.
Yeah.
I'll
An
say
important
that for
distinction.
me, Keith, I mean, we have examples of this today. I mean, especially in poor communities, like where in the past, some of the family members are like, they feel like they're trying to do good, help support people, and then others decide the way to make it in the world is to sell drugs or those kind of things. So Keith is not an anomaly in terms of human beings and
Sure.
actions, but
Yeah.
the difference is, I think, is that, because, and I was also reflecting on the fact that this community is like a gated community, like, so, and they're living in such close proximity to each other. But one of the things that you cannot do, I mean, you can, I guess I would say, try to provide an environment for people to be the best they can be. But when situations change, if that's not their nature, their intention, there's nothing you can do about that. And so to me, like you had this father who's a minister, and I'm sure for him, probably part of the beating the boy was, to me, a lot of times parents feel like it's a reflection of themselves or something they didn't get
Mm.
right or something they didn't do right, and so to try to beat it out of him or whatever. But Keith, like when she talked about it, he's always had his way of looking at the world. And his mom, to me, was an enabler. I mean, she loved him, but she was an enabler because she
Yeah.
wouldn't call him on those kind of things. And it's always interesting to me, too, the thing about how, I guess, and it's because you grew up in an environment and people did provide you with some kind of love and stuff like that, that he went outside. He didn't prey on the people that were in the community that he lived in. He went
Mm.
outside and preyed on those people that he didn't have any connection to, any relationship, and any feelings about. But, I don't know if that would have changed anything in the context of, if things had gotten worse, would he have preyed on the people inside? So for me, I feel like, it's just that the fact that it's much more concentrated. But we experience that, and in the context of people, in our communities, preying on other families, killing them, shooting them, involved in drugs and gangs and stuff like that. And we've seen that, and a part of that is because when the community or the society breaks down, and when there aren't opportunities, then people see other things as a way to support themselves, survive, and feel like it's a viable option. But then I also think it's not just that, because, I don't really know what goes into making up a person to be the kind of person that they are, and
Yeah.
that will allow them to consider do certain things. But Keith is not an anomaly. That's all I'll say.
Definitely. Definitely. And you got to figure out how to be in relationship with those people or to manage not being in relationship with those people. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah.
And I kind of piggybacking off of what Miss Pombana said. I feel like not that their family was doing a disservice. They were only trying to live in the only way that they knew how to, but like with the understanding that the mother and father came from a time that is not the time that they currently live in, and are still
Mm.
aching and yearning to go back to a different time. Like the way Keith was turning out to me was that he was trying to be a part of the time that they were in. He was trying to get outside because they were isolated from outside, so he could figure out how to live in the world that they had to live in. Um, so to me, it kind of
Wow.
felt like the family was still not in denial, but he was trying to get out there and figure out how he could live, and not just live within the confines of a wall. He was trying to figure out how to live in the world that was outside of that wall, and they were still trying to keep him in there.
That's a
So
really good and interesting point, baby, because it's like, you know, that's a parallel between Keith and Lauren that I hadn't seen before, but and clearly they approach that question of how do we survive outside of outside of these walls differently, but they both seem to share the understanding that like we can't live just in here forever, but yeah, wow, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to add just one thing about that is the fact that he kept bringing money back to the family and bringing gifts for the younger kids does
Mm-hmm.
show that he had some affection for the family or some caring about the family.
For
And part
sure.
of what he did probably was because he wanted to help take care of the family, even though it's not the way they wanted to be taken care of. So he is not a complete psychopath, because he cared about the family and his brothers. So
Yeah. And yeah, I think it goes back to a Mama Pambana. I think Mama Pambana mentioned this, but just like, people want to contribute, people want to be a part. And also, what we mentioned earlier, just like with he has something to prove, to people. And then but yeah, obviously just like a different value system for how to go about that than the rest of his community. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go off Keith right now. We're doing a good job. It's kind of different subject.
And then I guess I'll say that also brings up the question about if one comes from your community, but the values that they hold
Mm-hmm.
are, I guess I would say, negative towards others, because he wasn't negative towards them,
Yeah.
but he was killing other people. And so the question becomes, how do you how do you deal with that? What does the community do? And how do they hold somebody accountable? And they didn't really have a way to hold him accountable.
Yeah. Bill, we don't have to stay on Keith. What did you want to?
I think it's a good conversation, but I didn't want to derail it because I thought it was pretty good. I guess one of the things in this chapter I think was a really sad moment for me is when Lauren when he hears Corey talking about like, it's your Lauren,
Yeah.
not mine, right? She makes the comment, I think, of something along the lines of like, she realized that Corey never looked at her as her own daughter.
Yeah.
And like, she'll never look at Corey the same, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. To me, I kind of felt like, I don't know, Lauren kind of hardened almost and almost cut out Corey from her life. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, she won't be important to me then either. And I just wondered if anybody else had that. Did anybody else have that feeling, or did anybody see it that way? Like, kind of felt like she kind of
Interesting.
hardened to it and kind of
Yeah,
cut Corey out too.
That's a good question. Nas, I see
I
somebody
did.
else in the waiting room, but yeah, please speak to that.
I did. When I read it in the book, I was like, oh yeah, that's gonna change their relationship forever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because um she always liked Corey, like she always thought of her as a mother. But and I feel like when we get angry, and she felt like, well, you're coming after my favorite kid, I'm going to talk about your favorite kid. I don't think she was really thinking about, how it would affect Lauren at the time. She really
Mm.
didn't even understand, how it just came out because, oh yeah, well, you think Keith is my favorite kid, well, I think Lauren's your favorite kid, and this is what I'm going to say about your favorite kid. And then it just she, without even thinking, changed their whole dynamic, because it really hurt Lauren. And even though she didn't intend for that to hurt her, I don't think she did, but it changed their dynamic for forever, and it,
Well,
it made Lauren feel
I
like she
would,
had to
I
turn
would
up.
say that tension existed prior to that moment. That
Mm-hmm.
feeling they both had and knew prior
Mhm.
to this particular incident that then just brought it to light, and then of course birthed a change in their relationship. I do think
Yeah.
that challenge in their relationship was already present, and I would also say not uncommon in families that have those kind of dynamics.
For sure. For sure.
Should I say not? Yeah, and it doesn't. I mean, even though she was the daughter of another woman, it could be within families where the mom and dad are the parents of all the kids, but that,
Hmm.
there's usually some tension between or some feeling that one is favored by one or the other and those kind of things. So it's just, I think, a human dynamic that a lot of times, if situations don't force us to address it, then, it just remains somewhat under the surface. Everybody knows it, but they ever never address it or speak to it.
I think to me, Lauren is not a particularly attached character, I would say. So, I to me, I definitely saw, I read it as her kind of like shocking, but sort of like to M's point, probably some of her was aware that it was there, so it wasn't totally unexpected. So she kind of like took it in stride. But I think it's definitely one of those things where it's like, if I know you see me this way, I
Hmm.
can't continue to approach you the same way, even if I would like to. Like I don't know if it necessarily changed how Lauren felt about Corey, but it did change her understanding of Corey's feelings towards her, which I do think, changed the way that she approached Corey beyond that. So um I do see that Donna joined us. Donna, I want to give you an opportunity to check in. It's a number, color, and the same question as last time. Just have you read the chapters that we're talking about today, and how much do you care about spoilers?
Yeah, I'd say number is about a 6, but is gonna be an 8, so I'm super excited. Color, I've been feeling brown all my life, and I have read this book, and I've also read the next book.
Nice,
So yeah.
nice. And did you have I don't know how much you've heard, but did you have anything that you wanted to add to this conversation we've been having about chapter 9?
I guess just kind of like on the dynamic between Lauren and Corey. I I don't know what the initial question started out to be, but just kind of like thinking back, I feel like it didn't seem like Lauren was entirely surprised, but just more so that like a truth was spoken out loud. Sort of what Im was saying of like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people just like know that that's the case. Um, and if I remember correctly, can I ask what prompted Corey saying it out loud? I want to make sure it's not a spoiler.
Yeah, yeah, you can. It was when Keith, I think it was like the first or second time that Keith went, I think the second time that Keith went missing,
Yeah,
and their dad wasn't Corey basically accused the dad of not
as
looking
hard as
for him hard
yeah.
enough, yeah. And basically being like, if it was Lauren, you'd be out there.
Yeah, I mean also though like she was in a moment of desperation and I think that she
Sure.
was trying to say like what would prompt him to look even harder, you know? Like treat my son as you would treat your favorite child, you know? Like
Yeah.
she thought that he could be dead, like anything could have happened to him. Like I think in those moments like yes, it was a truth, but she was kind of like pushed to an emotional brink too.
Sure. Sure. I do want to transition into chapter 10, and then because I think a few people have brought up that idea of like, this was something that happened in this moment of desperation that still had just like irreversible consequences for the relationship. And there are two things as we like move into the next section of the book that sort of like speak to that, foreshadow that Octavia leaves for us. So first, um, we move into the year 2026. Octavia gives us another verse from the books of the living from Earthseed. And I'm gonna read this full one, and then the next one I'll just kind of like summarize it. But the first one is civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. It is a means of combining the intelligence of many to achieve ongoing group adaptation. Civilization, like intelligence, may serve well, serve adequately, or fail to serve its adaptive function. When civilization fails to serve, it must disintegrate unless it is acted upon by unifying internal or external forces. And so to me, that reminded me of another book study discussion that we had on the knowledge illusion by Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach. Definitely recommend checking that one out if you haven't already. But it's basically about this, it looks at the way that we conceptualize knowledge and tries to redefine knowledge from something that's like about the information that we store in our brains as individuals and redefine it as something that we access through our interactions with other people and the world first and foremost. And I think that this quote is reflective of that, just in the sense that like it makes it clear that like that intelligence that allows us to create these communities is like one, it's fundamentally a social thing. Two, it's something that we have evolved to make ourselves more flexible and adaptable. And three, it just doesn't always work, you know? And then the next quote, which I'll just summarize, it's at the start of chapter 10. When stability disintegrates, people give in to fear and depression, need and greed. And then basically, she goes on to say, when no force is strong enough to unify people, they start to divide, they struggle against each other until something arises that is strong enough to unify them, whether that being, and she says, like, whether that is a leader that can unite them or a tyrant that they fear, and so I think it kind of goes back to this idea of like power struggles, right? And just that power can manifest in different ways, and that, unity is not always necessarily in and of itself a good thing. A lot of the time the question is like, what is bringing these people together? So, but we'll talk about that more in a second. I'll sum up the rest of chapter 10 real quick. Keith is still out on the streets. He's looking big and bad. He's not even 14 yet, but Lauren says that he's as tall as their dad, nearly as broad shouldered. He's out and about. He says he's got himself an apartment and they've got all these drugs and TVs and stuff. And I'm living great. I'm living the high life out here. Don't worry about me. And basically, he thinks he's the big dog until he meets a bigger dog and doesn't come home, So, and the family is destroyed. This is the chapter when Keith unfortunately passes away. And it's really, it's pretty brutal, just as it is, when you live that life, of like competition and domination and like just, trading life for life. Um, so yeah, how does he die? Um, uh, uh, they don't know. They just find his body and he's just been tortured. Yeah. Skin removed, eyes burned out. It's bad. It's bad. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, any thoughts on chapter 10, on this big loss, this grief that the community has to go through, or this idea of like you know, the things that unify a community and the things that divide a community. Yeah. Donna, I see a hand.
I had thoughts just kind of like on Keith and his lifestyle in general. I was more so just surprised that he came from the community that Lauren came from. And
Mm-hmm.
like I know they're siblings, so they're not gonna be the same. Everybody grows up into like a different person. But like he came up in a place where like there was like sharing and there were like resources, and like
Sure.
this idea of like I don't know, society or whatever, and then he leaves. He has like this desire to really just like escape. And he kind of like flips into something else entirely. And I think that that always kind of like perplexed me, like wrapping my head around that of like why was it so easy for him to adapt the ways of the
Mm.
outside? And not even like the ways of the outside as though it was common, but more so like I guess like the more violent, darker things,
Oh my, I want to speak to that and then I'm going to back off for a little bit. But this is stuff, questions like that I love questions like that because the things that cause people to be who they are, I believe, are just impossibly complex. It's just like hundreds and thousands and millions of moments over like a lifespan that like in the context of the rest of their life and experiences like trigger things and push them in directions that are just truly there are too many factors to be able to predict it. But I think to what you said, Donna, like yeah, one way that you could look at it
I
is
didn't
that
remember.
Nas, could you mute the Thank you. But like one way that you could look at it is, yeah, he comes from this community of relative abundance, of relative cooperativeness and compatibility, and therefore he is an anomaly from that community for having fallen into this life. Another way that you could look at it is that he came up as a 12-year-old in a community where they are constantly looking over their shoulders, fighting off invasions, like even his sister and siblings are going out on a regular basis to learn how to shoot guns. He's hearing about the horrors that they see when they're out there. His first exploration of that outside world, in his first like indulge like the first time he indulges in this curiosity, he's beaten and robbed of everything he's got on him.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, so on the one hand, it's like, how could this happen? And then on the other hand, it's like, well, obviously that's how he would turn out because nobody else had the specific series of experiences that he had at this pivot. He's 12, at this pivotal point in his like development and childhood. But I think that we could do a whole session for talk for 2 hours on all of the things that may have made Keith the way that he was. So, but I think that that's an interesting point to bring up because it's always and Mama Pambana brought this up as well. Like who knows why people become this way, but they do. It's not
Yeah.
something abnormal, even in our society, which is supposedly so much better off, than the one here. We still see people like that emerge. So yeah, it's just why does anybody become who they are? But yeah, I'll open it back up. Thank you for indulging me.
I have a theory. I have theories like
Please share.
I feel like the first time he kind of went out it and he came back beaten you know literally. I feel like maybe it made him want to be out there even more to prove
Sure.
himself.
Get that
And I
lick back.
feel yeah, like it's like I'm going to get back at whoever done this to me. And I feel like when he went out a second time, maybe he had an accomplice out there that kind of helped him get his get back.
Yeah.
And and also this person um was very pivotal in teaching him the ways of out there.
Mm,
I feel like he had a mentor. Maybe he wasn't maybe he lived in the well him living in his community all his life, maybe he seen things differently, or maybe he got his first type of inklings of the outside through other people, and it made him curious, and maybe he did start like kind of like turning away from you know what the dad was speaking about. Maybe he never really believed in it. Like I was like, maybe he was a child and he was just like, this isn't really for me.
yeah.
But then when he got out there and he had like this new mentor, maybe, and maybe he was like, you know what, that's what I think too, and this is kind of the life that I kind of want to go into. Maybe the person made it seem like yeah, you're gonna be this, you're the top dog, you're gonna learn how to defend yourself, you're gonna have all this money, and
Hmm.
and that was my theory. Like maybe he just kind of got coaxed into it because he was of his stature. Somebody was like, you know what, he'll be useful, and I can sway him into doing the things that I need him to do because like he's young. Like I don't think he knows how to like set up licks, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Do you
by
write it all?
himself,
Do Do you write it all, Cash? You do any creative writing?
I do.
You should take that on. You should write Keith's story, his
I swear
perspective.
I
Yeah, I
should.
think that'd be awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one other thing, and that is that he was a little bit of a celebrity out there because he could read, and none of them could read, and he could show them how to
True.
use all that equipment.
Yeah.
So,
True.
in a way, it made him a little bit special where he wasn't special in his home and in his community, but
And
he
he's
gets out
contributing
there.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point as well. Yeah. And then I think the other thing I think about is, Corey, his mom who's telling, putting this side, he's so special, he's her special man, So maybe that had something to do with it as well, just like having that expectation in his head that he feel like he needs to live up to. Yeah, man. Psychology. But yeah, what about this idea of just like, this the about this idea of like unification and division, and this idea of just like that when things get bad, people fall away from each other until something comes along that can bring them back together. Any thoughts on that? The way you see that expressed in the book or in real life?
I guess I'll say I don't really think that anybody, how should I say it, anybody is an island in unto themselves. So they find ways to connect with someone else or other groups so that they can survive. So even when things are disintegrating, just like with when Keith went outside, he couldn't make it by himself.
Yeah.
And because we're human and we're social, I don't think we also can remain healthy. I guess I'll say I don't know about sanity because that's on a spectrum probably. That we're going to form groups, but the question is, what is the intent and motivation of the group, and how does that group interact with other groups? And so, to
Yeah.
me, again, when she talked about when civilizations break down, you know, is the intent or motivation to, if you want to be a leader or you want to have power over others, to prey on others, or is it to figure out how we can help one another so that we can all be okay? But I think that's the question that we can't answer in the context of like what you were saying earlier, Chin, that when things get bad, that's to me when you find out what are the, I guess I would say, the core motivations or values of a person. And then
Yeah,
that shows up in the terms of the groups that they align themselves with.
for sure.
And I feel like we getting to see a lot of that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I just wanted to add on that piece on civilization as the intelligence of a collective.
Mm-hmm.
There's a podcast by Emergence Magazine that a couple of us have listened to recently
Oh
and discussed,
yes.
which is about deep. It's called about deep time diligence. So the relationship of time, particularly like the author is an Aboriginal author, and just kind of and it's Tyson Yomkaport, and he talks
Yeah.
about this concept of right story, wrong story, which is kind of that the idea that collectively all of us have our own perspectives, which are all false
Mm-hmm.
and true to us too.
Yeah, but
But
not
it's like,
not
but
the
when
whole
you put them
picture.
all together on a large scale, the scale of a culture, or even community, that creates all those like little perspectives somehow create something that is true
Yeah.
to human nature, and like that's how myths are created, things that are very archetypical, and even about like what is good and what is seen as like people's responsibility to step into.
Yeah.
And I do think what he also describes though is wrong story, which is this idea that um, while all the facts might be true, it's selected facts.
Yeah.
It's taking a story from a very specific group of folks or a cluster that then says, okay, this is the only truth, and that's kind of the
Just want to make sure
when she
you
talked about the civilization breaking down and not being adaptive anymore, it made me think of that idea of wrong story and
Mm-hmm.
the ability of a minority or small group to create this kind of this worldview and perspective, which I think pervades the book around violence, around competition. Like even Keith's action, it's embedded in this wrong story
Yeah.
that he is caught up in, that we're all caught up in.
Yeah.
And I think like parable, I would say in some ways is okay, how do we find another story?
Yeah.
How do we create another kind of right story and that kind of the earth seed as a philosophy and also a goal is part of trying to create that.
And
So I want to ask you a question from that reference point about right story, wrong story. You said that our individual stories are false. So that's what I heard you say, and if not, clarify for me. And then I also within that, I thought I was hearing that when you have other folks involved in creating the story, then I guess it moves to a more right story. But to Pamban's point earlier around in this moment, there's going to be a lot of collaborations. So the fact that more people are involved in the story creation, I'm not sure if that then leads to a truer story or even what is truth.
Thanks, Sam. Great clarifying question piece. So I don't think the author says false, but he says that's the difference between truths and what is real. Because we all have our own truths, which can conflict with each other. But really, the understanding what is real is when we put all those together.
But what is
when they
real?
Yeah, how do you know what is real?
You need a telescope, a microscope, quantum physics.
I think to at least in what the author in the podcast is talking to, it's
no. I'm asking Alvin what he's trying to communicate. I heard the same podcast you did. So what are you communicating through this idea of real truth and reality?
Okay. Here.
Thanks, Nas. I would say reality is a field that is like not one perspective, but a field of existence between not just even humans, but kind of the universe. That in some way consciousness is not individual to humans or individual to us, but and that's kind of there is like a philosophy around okay that we're all like the universe can't experience anything, so it splits itself up into these individual kind of perspectives of some kind of creation process. So I would say maybe the kind of what we would understand to be reality is a field of evolving experience. Yeah, I don't know. Nas wants to get in on this.
I want to throw this out there. Would another way to say that be somewhat of like a mutual understanding? That two conscious beings in a room able to say, this carpet's yellow, the other person says the carpet looks yellow, and that's where we're deriving this idea of reality from. That's
So
probably
if we are Nas, does that make it real?
shit. I think then, damn, I think to the person it is, and sometimes that's what's important. The person's experience, how someone feels, and how we interpret reality, even if it's not completely congruent with what is, there is some importance there, and we've made a lot of progress based off of that notion.
You say progress. What does that word mean to you?
Progress in terms of being able to more accurately define one's experience compared to another's experience.
And I would argue, and I'm going to shut up, progress itself is a social construct. The whole concept that we have made progress is very linear and probably even heavily Western in orientation. So we can build on this later. I just think the idea of reality, and particularly for humans who are struggling with what is real through the lens of their own consciousness, both individually and even as a collective, helps inform and shapes what is real, and also our ability to comprehend what that might mean.
Appreciate that input, and I think I would not. I would agree with you on that point that progress probably isn't the correct word to use to describe that, and it is definitely
Hold on,
baked into Western ideology.
hold on. Say something.
Mhm.
You're
I,
not, you're
I'm not saying it was incorrect. I mean, I'm not suggesting anything you share was incorrect. I'm just challenging us as a group to be thinking about, what do we mean by the words and language we use? And we may not be able to use language as that same piece that uh Alvin referenced earlier about the limitations of at least English and the language itself is created in a cultural context that all does not always transfer into communicating other forms of reality. Yes,
Agreed.
sir. Hello. Hey, I was kind of trying to listen to content.
Wonderful. Yeah, man. Thanks for bringing up that piece by Tyson Young Kaporta Alvin. That's really powerful. And I think I want to move into chapter 11, but I want to speak a little bit to that concept of like wrong story, right story, because I think that like to me, my understanding of it is it's like this idea that like what is real, like actually real, is always out of our reach because even with all the human minds in the world on the same page, our perspective would still be a very small slice of the whole universe, you know? But and the wholeness of like being in existence is what is real, but that's not something that we can ever really know, you know, not in its entirety. But when we bring together all these different perspectives, the more perspectives you bring, the more you understand about what the perspectives are, the closer you get to and a larger understanding of that whole slice. And to this point of like, you know, what is the wrong story that's being sort of like, you know, proliferated here. I think that, and we'll see this as we get into chapter 11. I think it's this idea that like my survival is more important than yours, you know, versus the idea that both of our survival is important and we have a better chance of surviving together, you know. So but moving on into chapter 11, as always, it starts with a verse. And the section of this one that I want to highlight is any change may bear seeds of benefit, seek them out. Any change may bear seeds of harm, beware. And this is important to keep in mind because in this chapter, first of all, the community is falling apart. She says that like since at this point, since Keith has died, I'm not sure how much time it's been. Maybe when we come back to this book in a year or two, I'll track the timeline a little bit better. But they've had like 7 incidents since Keith has died, robberies, and the robbers killed a community member, and they had to kill the robbers, and you know it's just getting harder and harder. Um, and then on top of that, and this one is really fun and topical, company towns are back. Yay! There's a town that she mentions called Olivar, which is basically falling into the sea. You know, it needs a lot of help. And then this company called KSF, which is short for Kagimoto, Stom, and Frampton, comes in and essentially buys the town and starts this program where they're basically accepting immigrants to work for the company, which is now based out of this town. And then I want us to I want to take a sec. So my last point for chapter 11, and then I want to step back to the last one. We also learn a little bit more about Lauren's plans. Thank you, Nas, for you know, what she wants to do. You know, she's like, I'll be 18 in a year, and when that time comes, whatever happens, I'm leaving and I'm heading north. You know, I'm gonna try to make it to Oregon somehow because I can't keep living here. Um, and uh, 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 and she also names the book of Earthseed, the books of the living, as sort of a reflection of the Egyptian book of the dead. So that's an interesting part of this mythology. But I want to go back to this piece about the company towns because I think that what's really the most interesting about this is this idea of like this multinational conglomerate. Well, there's a few things that's interesting about it. First of all, there's this idea that as the regular structures of this society are breaking down, of our society are breaking down, we see corporations, which in a lot of ways still hold on to a lot of that power, as it slips out of the hands of like the traditional institutions, fill in, some of those things that we expect from the institutions that govern our society. They're like, yeah, we'll fix your infrastructure, we'll keep everybody paid and fed, but as it happens, when you're the person who's handling all those responsibilities, you get to set the terms, and their terms are you are slaves to our company now, familiar. We've seen recently many companies try to bring back, company towns in some way. And honestly, I would argue in a lot of ways we're already there and have been there for a while. I'm not going to say any names, but there are certainly a few companies whose names you'll see on just about everything here in our city. So and maybe the only difference is that right now they control in the background versus coming out to the front and putting their names on top of it, but I definitely think that is something to think about and be aware about. And the other part of it is this idea of this multinational conglomerate. Now, will it be Japan, Germany, and Canada? Who knows? But this idea that like somebody's going to buy us if we're up for sale, and that a lot of America at this point is up for sale. And yeah, I think it's this interesting comment and also prediction just about the way that like, you know, that different geopolitical entities move in relationship to each other, but also it's like, as an empire falls, as your ability to hold and control territory recedes, somebody's going to grab it up, and it turns out that right now the people that got the most power to do that is this company. So yeah, any thoughts on chapter 11, on this community falling apart and who's picking up the pieces?
I find it interesting that Dad and Corey are, well, Dad is shrugging it off more, but Corey's like, let's go, even as a minister's wife who is a leader in the community that you're in is still thinking about leaving based on the experiences that she has had, right? She's lost her favorite son. But she still wants to leave. And then Lauren and Dad were talking, or no, Lauren and Dad and Corey were talking. And she said, "Oh, I think it would be great if somebody did that here. Why wouldn't a big company come and buy us here?" And Dad said, "No, thank God, no." And she said, "You don't know. Why shouldn't they?" And he said, "Well, Roblito's too big, too poor, too black, and too Hispanic to be of interest to anyone. And it has no coastline. So what it does have is street poor, body dumps, and memory of once being well off, shade trees, big houses, hills, and canyons. Most of those things are still here, but no company will want us." So I don't know. I think about often living in an urban area. What what do the big organizations or companies want with us or not want with us? Um, so that just struck me and stuck with me. Just thinking about, here they're talking about doing more with less, having to do more with less, and what does somebody do when they have nothing but community? So it's it's really interesting to watch Lauren shift. Like her empathy is shifting too. The way she empathizes with people is shifting and not being as extreme. She's almost softening in a way, but I feel like there's been a lot of talk of fire. So I'm like, okay, is it her softening before a fire? Like, I don't know. So that's what stood out in chapter 11.
Anybody want to speak on? Oh, I see Donna's hand.
I just kind of wanted to follow up on that. I feel like there's a perceived security when you think of like, well, I guess at first when you come from a place where it's like we don't have a lot of physical or material resources, and you think of a company and you're like, well, they would introduce physical and material resources, you know, but at the end of the day, like you are kind of just fodder for whatever like larger goal they have in mind, which hence like the debt slavery that's talked about of like they end up getting free labor. And like even the mention of like, well, we're not by a coast. It's like they want the most advantageous thing for them. And so you're kind of just like selling yourself and your community to whomever like the new landlord or overlord like is going to be sort of in general. But yeah, I think that I don't know, it's just kind of reminiscent of seeing private corporations like buy up a lot of lands in cities. Even just like there's like this coffee shop around where I live and it's called like Capital One Cafe and it pisses me off,
Call
bro.
them out. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me so mad. I'm like, there's so many different coffee shops in Chicago. Why would you go to Capital One Cafe out of like all of them? But I would argue, as like in line with what you were saying, Chin, that like we're already sort of seeing like there are company towns and like there is just like development happening like in our own communities and around us of like um companies who are like hey, yeah, like, well, I don't know. I don't like the control that you give companies when you do submit to that kind of thing. Like even if they're like, we'll give you housing. Because there are opportunities like that too, where you can get like a company car, company housing, and it's just like, okay, but if anything goes wrong, this is your employer and they can take everything away from you. And that's terrifying.
I'll say that for me, what it makes me think about is that I went through this program, I think it was called neuro-linguistic programming. And it says that people tend to make decisions, the best decisions they can, given what they have. So I found it interesting that one, this whole story is uh couched in a sort of gated community that has resources. And even in that community, there are certain people who are, I guess I would say, more self-reliant, and there are others who are like, I don't really feel real resourceful, so I'm still looking for security. But like it also makes me reflect on what if this story were about homeless people and what are options they have? They don't have any houses, they don't have any land,
Yeah.
So what do they do? And so
Yeah.
again, they can, I think, they can have this conversation to some degree about, do we go do that because we feel like there are no jobs and we don't have no homes and we want to hope for the best and we won't be slaves? Or they can say, you know what? I'm going to try to the best of my ability to work with the people that I have, maintain my freedom, and create whatever it is that I think I need. And I feel like, like slavery for African Americans is, and sharecropping is a good example of that.
Yep.
That some people, they're like, enough of this slavery, F slavery, I need my freedom. And others like, well, if you go out there, you don't know what's out there. You might not be able to eat and all those kind of things. So to me, it's always about, I think, the makeup of the people. And also, I feel like you attract what you vibrate. So if you are a person that feels like, okay, I can be self-reliant. And like Lauren, she's self-reliant. She's like, I'm going to read these books and learn about, how I can live off of the land and what different trees and nuts and things provide. And others is like, oh,
No,
you know
thank
what?
you.
There ain't no jobs. There ain't no security. Maybe somebody else can provide that for us. So depending on, I think, what I want to say, makeup, your mindset determines what choices you make. And not that they gonna turn out like you want, but at the time, people really think they're gonna be best for them because of their mindset. And that's what's going on here. That there are those people who are not as, I guess you would say, resilient or self-determining, and then there are those that are, and they choose different paths.
What were you gonna add, Alvin? And then I want to jump in.
I was just going to add, this part of the discussion made me think about it in a different way. the corporations really as the primary villain and the
Yeah.
creators, not just the opportunists to jump in to the opportunity. Because I think it highlights a lot of the violence and like social chaos and politics, but fundamentally on a systems and a macro level, it's the corporations that concentrated wealth that really led
Yeah.
to the circumstances, both the climate change that ended up impacting the environment and the just people have less because it's more and more concentrated.
Yeah.
And then they're looking for security because it was all taken from them. So,
Yeah.
So I'm curious, is it the corporation that is the bad dog, or is it the cultural aspects that drives the corporate model and even maybe even created the corporate model?
Yeah. I want to speak to that. I want to
So
speak to that.
so okay, but hold on, man. Let me
Yeah,
finish.
go
So
for it. Go
is
for
it
it. Go for it.
so is it the and maybe it's somewhere in between there, but so is it again the big bad corporate model? Some would argue it might be the nation state. And there could be some other argument. So again,
Hmm.
is it the entity that human beings create, or is it the
Right.
human beings that create it?
Right.
Right.
And that makes me think about, both like what Donna spoke to and what Mama Pambana spoke to about this idea of self-sufficiency, because, yeah, sure, in some ways, you give a lot of freedom up to a corporation when you go to their company town, blah, 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 but you give up the exact same amount of freedom living under a modern state, And sure, technically, legally, there's a difference between a state and a corporation because, at least a democratic state is supposed to be more accountable to its people. But as we see, that is not always the case. And so when those systems of accountability erode, what really is the difference between the state owning your town and a corporation owning your town, and are and is the price of freedom of not having this this large entity with all these resources and a truck loaded up with guns so they don't have to worry about the bandits as they're transporting you to your new factory town, like, is the price of having to fend for yourself worth to you, is it worth is it are you willing to pay the price of like not living under somebody else like that? Are you willing to have to defend yourself and feed
Well,
yourself and all
I
that?
think
Yeah.
I think Chin, even at least for people of color who have created self-reliant collectives, that in certain times, regardless of that, others came in and destroyed those spaces and
Yep.
places. So of course, it's not binary and left or right, etc. But again, I want
Yeah.
to go back to the idea that these systems, these infrastructures, these models we were created by human beings with certain
Right.
kind of worldviews and certain ideas that then perpetuate themselves. So, example, we now live in communities where often we don't even know who our neighbors are.
Yep.
So, I might need a ride downtown, and my neighbor's got a car. I can't even go and ask for a ride
Yep.
because the nature of the social infrastructures that we have created don't support relationships and shared resources as it relates to even the concept of self-reliance. So
Yeah.
and I would just add brief.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. Is a third option that just isn't presented. It seems like it's not binary, or there's infinite options, right? So it's not corporation or self-sustaining.
right.
It's finding those to commune with and others who, but then there's the danger of siloing yourself, right? And being in a sphere and in a bubble of your own thoughts and everybody who agrees with you. So, and not
Complicated.
Yeah. And that made me think corporations no different than a family or than
Sure.
a tribe or a neighborhood. It's just different levels of yeah. that like they're all units of organizing.
Yep.
That humans aren't individual people, but and
Yep.
then it takes the values of whatever
Just different
is
shapes a
created.
community can take. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome, y'all. Let's move on to the
Back to the point, sorry.
yeah, for
I
sure.
think that almost comes back to the point you made about about the father. I think the communities, a lot of times their goals are benevolence and like community
Mhm.
thriving, whereas a corporation's goal is to like get their piece,
Money, money,
like
money.
extract away
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the resource from the surrounding area.
Well,
Regardless of how
Kepler
it
is
affects.
a corporation, it's a nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
So
Right.
go
I
ahead.
think the different. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think the difference though is the current corporations under capitalism only inherently exist to extract and don't sustain even their workers and their lives. So I can't say we're even the same fundamentally in terms of a
Well, hold
Yeah.
on.
corporation.
We're the same in the sense that we live in a capitalist society. We are leveraging resources from that same model. So there is something different related to how we negotiate, navigate relationships and
Yeah.
resources that's different. And I wouldn't argue it's just because the model itself, even in the corporate model, they have different types. They have B corporations, et cetera, that build into their models other ways of leveraging resources that support community. So again, while I think at a very broad level, the corporate model clearly designed and modified and driven around fundamental piece around maximum amount of profit for least amount of input to maximize that particular resource extraction. But that on top of that, the philosophical idea that
Mhm.
resources belong to individuals then lead to some of the other aspects of it. So,
That
And
intentionality in that paradigm. Yeah.
and then what I wanted to say though is, like M's point, corporations, no matter what they are, family, city, state, businesses, are people. And so to me, what it basically comes down to, and it's always been that case, and sometimes one has the upper hand and the other one doesn't, is what is the intention, the motivation, and the values of those people? Because, like I worked for GM and I hated it, but some people feel like, oh, I got this good job, I got to stay here even though I don't like what they're doing. And others like, I can't take this and it's not contributing to the betterment of my society and I'm gonna leave. And there's others like, oh man, this is survival of the fittest. If I can be on top and get over and I can live well, that's all that matters. So to me, it's always, regardless of what we're looking at, it's a contention between values and motivations and who's in those entities and what they decide to do. And so again, and there's always that, I guess the question is, which one will you choose?
Yeah.
And how will you live?
what's in your wallet?
Let's transition into the last chapter. Great conversation tonight, y'all. This is awesome. But so chapter 12, which is the last one we'll talk about tonight. Once again, I'm going to highlight the verse. And the part that I'm going to highlight is, or this is the whole verse actually for this chapter. We are earth seed, the life that perceives itself changing. Yeah, and I thought I wanted to highlight that just because I think that this philosophy, as we're going through this book, as we're learning more about this world and this character and Octavia Butler as a writer, like I think that this philosophy is definitely worth like engaging with, and exploring, and asking questions about. And so like, and if you don't have anything to say to that, but maybe don't, but like, if you just think about like what that implies that to be like life that perceives itself changing, and what it's like, and on the opposite, like what does life look like when it doesn't perceive itself changing? So, um, but the plot, chapter 12, the Garfield family is accepted to Olivar. Joanne and Lauren say goodbye, most likely for the last time. They're like, hey, we'll write each other, maybe we'll see each other, but they both know probably not. Sad. And speaking of sad, Dad doesn't come home and they never find him. Um, yeah, this is man, this is a hard one. I think it's like well, one, I think it's interesting because it just like I don't know how much we talked about this last time, but I think it's very interesting that this is a world in which like, even in all this collapse, people are still going to work. Sure, he works remotely most of the time, but he still has to go in to the university, once a week and or like once a month or something. And one of those days he just doesn't come back, and it's like, it's this like subtle comment about loss, I feel like, sometimes it's very, very clear cut and dramatic, but sometimes it's just not, and they assume that he's dead, but they never really know, which makes it, you know, to me, that makes it harder and scarier, like the uncertainty that comes with it, like and that's just because uncertainty is something that I like struggle with personally, but I think we'll definitely talk about later on how this loss affects Lauren as a character because it's definitely interesting. And then of course, Lauren preaches in her dad's place. She gives a sermon. She preaches the story of the importunate widow, and basically, this idea that the weak can overcome the strong if the weak persist, and persistence isn't always safe, but it's often necessary. And that's definitely just like, clearly a very powerful sentiment for a community to hold in a time of this like really like a supreme loss, like the loss of one of the really just like the rocks of their community, and yet they still gotta persevere, even with all the uncertainty that comes with that. So yeah, any thoughts on chapter 12? And I do want to hear from Khaled as we wrap up here. I'm gonna think about a question for you, but maybe, if you think of something to say, I won't have to ask it to you. So
I think that this chapter and like the last couple of chapters really set the tone to me to what kind of writer Octavia Butler is. Like it's
hmm
giving Shonda Rhimes in the way of like nobody is safe in this world, terrible things happen to everybody. There was like that
Yeah.
3-year-old girl, or I don't know how old she was, but like that little girl that got shot through the fence. There was Keith, and like now like her Lauren's dad has just like gone missing. And I think that I was in denial when I was first reading it, where I was just like, what do you mean you haven't seen him in months? Like he's an integral character, like he's the foundation like of this community. Like of course he's gonna come back. Um and I think that yeah,
Right.
it just kind of reminds me of what we were talking about earlier of like how the streetlights were out in the very first chapter and Corey kind of had that hope of like, well, they might come back, somebody will fix them, like things will go back to normal. And the idea of like, well, the sun rises every morning, so it's gonna rise tomorrow. And I think that I felt that way and feel that way with like people too, of like, well, if this person is important to me, if this person is important to a community, if I see them often,
Mm,
like it doesn't make sense for them to just disappear for like
yeah.
a long time. But I remember reading that and going back to the last time that Lauren had written in the book and being like, wait, how long has it been? Because I was like, no way he's been gone for like a while, but I think it was a while.
Yeah. 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 And the whole time there's that question of like, I think what's really crazy about this part is like they straight up never get confirmation. They just at a certain point they just give up. They're just like whether he's alive or dead, we're convinced he's not coming back. So let's hold the funeral. Um and yeah. Yeah, and yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Yeah, man, this is a heavy one. Anyone, anybody else? What about that piece about being life that perceives itself changing? What do folks think about that?
Can you say that one more time?
We are earth seed, the life that perceives itself changing.
I don't. My first thought is that life changes. You know, no
Mm-hmm.
matter if you, no matter how much you want it to be the same, like they, wanted things to go back to normal. But I feel like she's realized that there is no, maybe in her own thinking, there is no going back. It's just it's the future. So maybe it's just the way that she perceives, the world. Like, it's always changing and never stays the same, no matter how hard you try to, uh, I guess, evade change. It will always happen, no matter what, because that is, besides, taxes, that's the only thing that is constant in this life is changes and taxes and death. So, you know.
Yeah. So, Cass, let me ask you then, if that change is constant, like what is the difference between being aware of that change and being unaware of that change?
I feel like being aware of it is more so, um, preparing for change, knowing that change is always going to be there,
Yeah.
and seeing the patterns of change and knowing how to move accordingly. And I feel like not go the not being aware of change is, I feel like one way is pining for the past, hoping that things will go to a time where, um that brings you the most comfort, being ill prepared, not preparing because you don't want to even think that things are going to change. Like you don't even want to perceive it. So you're just like, I'm just going to hunker down and stay in my mindset, keep doing what I'm doing, and hopefully change would just, I don't know, avoid me, or like I don't know, like maybe they're just hoping that change just never happens, because I just feel like the people in my experience who don't prepare for the future are very much, they don't believe in change. They don't believe that change is constant. They just believe that change is just chaos, and chaos can be
Mm.
controlled. And chaos cannot be controlled. Chaos cannot be controlled. So
Otherwise, it's not chaos. Yeah.
yes. So
I just wanted to hop in and say I don't even think it's a matter of preparing for the future. I think it's a matter of like also preparing for the fact that the future that you prepared for might not ever be the case, you know?
Mm.
Like sort of like rooting yourself in this idea of like adaptability of like, yeah, I can do as much as I can to prepare for whatever future I can imagine, but also acknowledging that there's so much beyond your imagination and sort of being willing to still work through that and trying to like fortify a way in your mind that like you'll be able to approach those situations too.
Yeah.
And then I wonder about like and I think it's changed now. Like in businesses, a lot of time they talk about strategic plans, 5, 10 years. So Lauren doesn't strike me as a person who's maybe even thinking a year out. So for her, she's
Mm.
like, okay, things are gonna disintegrate, they're gonna get worse. And if they do get worse, what is it I need to be able to do to survive? And this is it's something that my daddy, I mean, like he always drilled into us, and I really hated it. He always talked about survival and what it took to survive and being aware of that and looking at it. I feel like that's where she is, like right now, because this change is so intense, it's so um broken down, I guess, to the basics of, like how you got to physically protect yourself, how you gonna eat, those kind of things. And that's kind of basically it, because there are no jobs and things like that. So to me, I feel like when she's talking about change, she's not looking like a year or 2 years ahead. She's looking at, based on what I'm seeing happen now, this is what I think is going to happen, and how do I prepare for it so that I can adapt. And so she'll be continually like reading what's going on and what that could lead to, and then trying to ask herself, how does she adapt to be able to deal with that and what is going to be required. And so that's kind of, to me, I'm like, it's a totally different mindset to grow up in a time where everything has been destroyed and you really can only rely on yourself and the other people that I guess like-minded with you. And even they weren't all of them like-minded, but they all in this community knew that they had to pull together if they were going to be able to survive. And then, like, even now, because of the killings and things like that, that's breaking down. So for her, it's like nothing is a given other than the fact that it's probably going to get worse. And what will that look like? And how can I be prepared?
Yeah. I saw that you were unmuted, Miss Betty. What did you want to add?
The only thing I was thinking the opposite, that change is hope. So in other words, things are really terrible and awful, but if you don't have change, then you're never going to have hope. And I think I thought of it kind of in the opposite way of, okay, things are horrible now, but maybe if, we work at it or we do this, things will get better. So that's what I think of as change also.
And maybe there's a little bit of both, maybe it's really just understanding that things could get worse, they could get better, but they're gonna go one way or the other regardless. So yeah. Yeah. I think I saw, did I see? Oh, maybe I'm just imagining things. Tara, I don't think we've heard from you in a while. I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on this piece as we close out.
Yeah, I I feel like you like read my mind because I was like debating on saying something because it's not really clear, but basically, with the dad going missing, like it reminded me of an earlier conversation in the book with between Corey and the dad, where it was like around the time when like the robberies were getting like worse and stuff, and they had a discussion where they were kind of like Corey was kind of like are you gonna kill them and stuff like that? Like, what if they kill you? Like these and then he was kind of like, well, like like we're set and stuff like we got I think like insurance and basically like all these things in place and stuff like that. So like I don't know. And then like I guess just like thinking about like all these characters in the book and then especially Corey in this specific situation, I'm just like when I read this I was like, "Oh my gosh, like you're here. It's here now." So like
Yeah.
like yo guys like what are we gonna do and stuff like that, but it's also just I guess to continue on this conversation of like preparing for change and stuff and then like preparing for it but then also like adapting to it like when it happens and stuff like that, like the fact that they had these like safeguards in place, like they're able to uh they have like some safeguards in place uh, to a point to where they prepared for like the future that they were able to prepare for itself. Obviously, they can't prepare for everything, but yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate it. Appreciate
Yeah.
it. And then I think I'm gonna pass it to you next, Khaled. Just to say, oh, and then I think Alvin, did you? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna pass it to you next, Khaled. Obviously, if you've got anything that you've been cooking up while we've been talking, please share. But I think the question that I'm gonna give you is really just like this question about what does it mean to be a being that sees itself going through changes. And what does it mean to not be a being that sees itself going through changes? What do you think about that?
Really understanding your question, like being a being, like how does it feel to be a being while seeing yourself? Like I don't know what you mean by
Like,
that.
how does it feel to what is it like to see yourself changing, to see yourself becoming different?
See me or in
Yeah, yeah, for you.
um,
And what would it be like to not see yourself changing?
Say that one
Let
more.
me help you out, Chin. So, call it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any changes going on with you?
Yeah,
How do you feel about those changes?
it's good.
Okay, and do you ever see any times when you have changes and you're looking at your own change that don't feel good?
Yeah.
Okay, so back to you, Chin. That's the beginning, opening up for the clarity, and ask him some more. Dig deeper with him if you can.
I guess like talk about the difference between those two fields.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, like, um, for myself.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I feel like I'm getting a better understand. Like, my vocabulary has definitely gotten better. I like that. I think so personally. Um, and like, something that I don't like. Not that like I'm trying to be a slacker or anything, but like if I get too good at something and then more work comes my way, like that's what I don't like. Um, but like then that's a good thing though, but at the same time, like it takes time. Um, but is that did I answer your question?
Hey, I like to
Let me
ask a
ask.
follow-up question too when you get through, Chin.
Yeah, let me ask you one more, and then I'll pass it to you. Is it scarier to see the changes happening, or is it scarier to not realize until after the changes have already happened?
I can't really explain it. Like
Well, at least say your answer
Well,
to the mic so people can hear.
the second one that she said.
You can't speak to and try a little. Why is that scary?
Um, like because I'm thinking of something completely different than you are. I know I am. Um, uh, hmm, mm, don't know. I can't think of anything.
Yeah, think about that. Well, maybe we'll come back to that one at the next discussion. And what did you want to ask?
I want to ask Khaled when he gets offline to share more about this particular experience and how we can, if we can, improve it for audience your age. And we can take it offline. So if you want to beat up on us brutally, you can, and don't have to feel like our feelings are hurt.
Okay. Okay.
I have a question for Khaled, and I don't know if you can answer it, but you said that it's scary. And can you tell me what makes it scary for you? When you say scary, what is it that you're scared of?
Being able to see, I kind of forgot Gina's question, but not being able to see the change that easily, like I don't like that's what I was saying. I don't know how to say it, like because that doesn't make sense to me either, but I'm still saying it if that makes sense. Um,
Mm,
um, um, so I guess that's all I had to say.
mm. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, I think I definitely want to come back to that one. I want to hear more about your perspective on that because I think that's something that we all deal with at some point. It's like there are those things that we see happening, and then there are those things where we wake up and it's just like, oh goodness, when did it become like this? And yeah, there's just more and more of that as you sort of like move into adulthood. But yeah, it's 8:11. We're over, so I'll start to close this out. But yeah, thanks everybody for a fantastic conversation. Silent round of applause. Yeah, great work, everybody. Yeah. Once again, think we went in real deep on a lot of really good stuff. I'm super excited for the next one. Um, as before, we will be back in 2 weeks. If I can pull up my calendar, I can give you an exact date. One moment. My apps are set up
It's the
differently.
5th of March.
5th, okay, thank you, Mama Pambana. Yes, we'll be back we'll be back on the 5th of March for the start of Women's History Month, and we'll continue exploring this powerful story that I would say is a part of that. We'll be going from chapters 13 to 19. I believe everybody here has read the book, so just brush up if you want. Yeah. And shout out to the Indianapolis Recorder for supporting the Kepler Institute and for supporting the Mumbo Jumbo Community Conversation Series. Shout out to all of you watching the live stream or, watching the recording in the future and, supporting our work. And if you want to support our work further than just participating in this conversation, or just giving us some good views, visit donate.kepler.org and leave a little financial support as well. Yeah, that's all I got. Thanks, everybody. Great work.
Bye.
Great work to y'all. Great conversation.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
night.
And tell me, I need some